Why do you think, because the gorillas were really just the first of these animals that you studied that had, horrifying, savage reputations. Why do you think the gorillas had that reputation? Why had nobody realized before?
People went out to kill them. They went with a gun, and in their mind, it was something ferocious. So if that's in your mind, then you make it ferocious. And if a gorilla comes close, you kill it. Then you bring a big trophy home, and people celebrate you as being a big hunter. But I was very fortunate having been in Alaska, and I was being close to wolves, close to bears. I knew that animals are not basically aggressive. If you approach them unaggressively, quietly, calmly, don't go too near, and so forth, they'll learn to accept you. And the gorillas, I simply, first I try to sneak close. That's no good. You can't see them well. They get nervous because they realize something strange nearby. Then I simply sat on a branch of a tree and watched them from there. If they moved away, I let them go away. After a while, going back to the same animals day after day, no fear. One day, a female climbed up in a tree and sat next to me. Now, that was a great experience. She looked one way, I looked the other way, because you don't stare at gorilla people. And after a while, she climbed back down and joined the group. Now, hey, what nicer experience can you have in the wild?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you're sort of jumping the gun slightly, because we managed to find in the BBC archive a clip of an interview that you did with Desmond Morris about 1965, I believe, which talks about this very rather different approach that you brought to the study of animals. So I'd like to play that in a moment. Before we do, I just thought we chose this as a slide to leave up throughout, because we didn't know that James Bond was a zoologist, but here he is in
James Bond hugging a pig.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of new age James Bond. And what's this, 1978 in Brazil?
77, 78. Okay. This is a white-lipped peccary in eastern Brazil in the Pantanal, where I was studying pigs, alligators, jaguars, and so forth. But in Africa, I had a warthog as a pet. So if you want a really nice pet, get a pig.
So was this a great friend?
Oh, I had to keep him out of the bed at night.
And we should also say that this photograph, I believe, was taken by Kay?
Yeah, she was sitting in the front of the boat.
Okay. So let's back to Desmond Morris with a sort of rather entertaining interview from 1965. So if we can have clip 3, please, that would be great.
You've written about the difficulty of approaching animals without arrogance and without aggressiveness, and of the knowledge of being in many ways inferior to them. Can you enlarge on this?
Well, when you approach any dangerous animal unarmed, you're naturally inferior to it because you have really nothing to fight with, and certainly with a gorilla and tiger you stand no chance whatsoever. Now, these animals certainly are able to feel how you feel, so to speak. They feel if you're aggressive or if you're submissive. In other words, if you approach a dangerous animal and you don't feel aggressive towards it, I feel the chance of being attacked are much slimmer than if you go in there strutting with a gun saying, I'm going to kill you. So I feel that if you approach an animal with a little bit of humility, I have to get along much better than if you go in armed.
Let's blame the editor for that, shall we? Now, this is a tight junction, so I'm going to talk for 30 seconds while we move up to the next clip. But all I would observe is that, gosh, isn't it amazing it took zoology that long to realize what now seems kind of obvious in hindsight?
Tigers were just like gorillas. I worked mostly on foot in central India. I often met them close, too close, by accident. But animals are very tolerant. They don't want conflict. When they see it's an accident, usually they give you the benefit of the doubt.
Well, once again, he's being rather prescient in this conversation because the next study is of an animal that had an even more ferocious reputation than the mountain gorilla. So if we can have clip 4, please.
When George arrived in India, it was a crucial time for its wildlife.
We had a lot of hunting going on, a lot of sport hunting going on. We had no laws or legislations in India about protecting wildlife. Everything was up for slaughter, and there was George sitting trying to understand how tigers behaved, probably the most complex and challenging task ever undertaken.
When I came to India in the early 60s, large mammals were there to be shot, not to be observed. He looked at them over the barrel of a rifle, and I looked at them with binoculars.
George, his wife Kay, and their 2 young sons lived here in close contact with tigers for almost 14 months.
I mean, I was more afraid of his being out with tigers than I was with the gorillas. And he had such faith in them. I think this is probably the main thing. If you don't show aggression, that they're not going to. And I had to learn to accept that. I think we realize now how unique it was. The boys were babies, toddlers in India. This was the way people lived. You travel to some place and you live and you see animals, and the animals outside were just normal scenery, I guess.
Now, this is gorillas and then tigers. We know you went on to study lions and 1 or 2 other big, sexy animals. Is there a theme developing here? Did you deliberately go for the big, sexy animals, the charismatic megafauna? Was this a deliberate thing, or was it just that you'd been invited to do it by somebody?
Oh, incidentally, charismatic is a lovely word. In the original Greek, it means gift of grace. Well, a tiger, a lion, is really a gift of grace. Mm-hmm. There are many reasons for studying the big animals. For one thing, they're beautiful, they're readily observable, or some not so readily. But there's real satisfaction of being able to commune with the animals. I like to work with individuals. Yes, I realize the population, the species is important. That's the next step. But to learn about the animals, I need to know the society, which means knowing the individual. I like to write a biography of an animal. I like to give it a history. And for that, you need to have close contact, peaceful animals, and some of the species I study provide just that. Of course, I can give you ecological reasons, how they're the top of the food chains and affect the prey animals, the deer and others, and they need a lot of space, so by protecting them, you automatically protect all the others, tens and thousands of species in the same area. But, you know, science is very important, but unless you have the emotion that goes into a project, you can't understand animals. You need to look at them with a bit of empathy, intuition, try to get into their minds to try to see what their view of the world is, not just your questions, because your questions are meaningless to them.
So, I mean, it's a sort of personal question. Do you feel ever a little bit misunderstood? Because you do have, and as Peter Matheson has said, you've got a reputation for being pretty scientific, pretty cut and dried in many ways, but there's clearly a kind of a soft center in there. You are aware of emotions and a passion, love of these animals. What was it that drove you? Was it a curiosity in a sort of dry scientific sense, or was it a kind of excitement at the opportunity of going to see lions or tigers or whatever?
Well, it's a combination of everything. If you're going to be a scientist, you got to do solid science. You got to write these fat, dry reports with statistics and graphs and so forth. But that's one aspect of it. If you want to do conservation, conservation has to be based on science. But what is conservation? It's a moral issue. It's beauty, it's ethics, animals have a right to exist, it's spiritual values, it's religious values, its country being proud of the animal. There are many things involved, but they're all part of the emotion. Why are we concerned about protecting tigers and pandas? Not because they're biodiversity, come on. You're interested because they're big and beautiful and they touch us somehow. And that's what people respond to.
So these big, charismatic animals are a way to get people to feel something for an environment that, if it's saved, will protect not only them, but all sorts of other creatures at the same time.
That's the kind of films you make, basically.
Well, hopefully. Yeah. Well, we'll get to that later. Now, in that same interview with Desmond Morris in 1965, you were asked what you were planning to do next after the tiger study here, and you came up with what I found to be, well, part of it was kind of obvious, but then you came up with another part of the answer which I found really intriguing. So if we can have clip 5, please, that would be great.
You've done the gorilla, you've done the tiger. Now, when you've finished writing up the results of your tiger work, what are you going to do next?
Well, I'm going to study lions, for one thing. And one topic I looked into when I was in India, which unfortunately is not now possible because of political consideration, was to look for the Yeti. The only concrete evidence there is are some perfectly sharp and beautiful tracks of the Yeti. Now, these tracks do not belong to any known animal. It is not a bear, it is not a monkey, it is not an ape. Until somebody explains these tracks, there's some animal there that has not been discovered.
So we'll come back to the Yeti later, actually, because there's the Yeti makes an appearance in Peter Matheson's book, but that's just a tantalizing sort of glimpse of something to come. You are, as we've said, I think a man of some contradictions, and I think this emerges quite well from the next clip, which was about your work on lions in the Serengeti, which followed immediately on from that interview, actually. So if we can have clip 6, please, that'd be great.
Lions followed tigers in 1966 when he launched the first serious scientific investigation of their ecology and behavior in the Serengeti. His 2 sons grew up with a very different idea of the family cat.
George came home and he said, I brought you something. Sure, I said that we weren't going to have any lions, were we? And he said, no, but this one was at the kill, and its mother apparently just left it there because she has no milk. I just had to bring it. So I put it in a box with a hot water bottle and blanket underneath, and by the next day, all the other ladies in the Serengeti were coming over to visit because we all loved having the pet.